Nobody in Dry Creek had expected Nathaniel Harrington to come back. Not after 3 years of silence. Not after the way he had left. Quietly, without a goodbye. Without even a note tacked to the door of the small house where Selena Westbrook had waited for him every evening that first week. Then every Sunday. Then not at all. He rode in on a gray morning, when the dust was still low and the town hadn't fully woken yet. His horse was tired. He looked tired too. But there was something in the way he sat in the saddle, straight-backed, unhurried, that told anyone watching he hadn't come back by accident. He had thought about this ride for a long time. What nobody knew yet was what had brought him back, and what he was carrying in the inside pocket of his coat. Nathaniel was 31 years old, lean from years of working other men's land across the territory. He had left Dry Creek with nothing but a bedroll, a horse, and a wound that didn't show on the outside. He had written one letter before leaving. One careful, honest letter, the kind a man writes only once in his life, when he finally decides that pride isn't worth more than the person he's losing. He had addressed it to Selena. He had given it to his brother Edmund to post. He had never received a reply. For 3 years, he had told himself she had chosen silence, that she had read his words and decided against him. It was a hard thing to carry, but he had carried it. He had worked, moved on, taken jobs in towns where no one knew his name. He had tried, in the quiet way stubborn men try, to forget her. Then, 2 months ago, a traveling merchant passing through the ranch where Nathaniel worked had mentioned Dry Creek in passing, had mentioned that the Westbrook girl was engaged now, getting married in the spring to a man named Gerald Cobb. Settled man. Owned a hardware store. But Nathaniel had set down his coffee and looked out at the flat horizon for a long time. He told himself it didn't matter. He went back to work. He lasted exactly 11 days before he saddled up and rode. The town looked the same, mostly. The general store had a new coat of paint. The livery had expanded. But the layout of the streets, the smell of the morning air, the particular way the wind came off the hills to the east, all of it settled over him like something familiar and uncomfortable, and the way an old coat fits when you've changed shape since you last wore it. He stabled his horse and walked to the only boarding house in town, a narrow 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Fay Dobbs. She recognized him immediately and had the grace not to make a show of it. "Room's 4 bits a night," she said, handing him a key without being asked if he wanted one. "Much obliged," he said. He didn't ask about Selena. Not yet. He saw her the next morning. She was coming out of the dry goods store with a basket over one arm, and she was talking to an older woman beside her, laughing at something. She hadn't seen him yet. He had a few seconds to simply look at her, which he knew was more than he deserved. Selena Westbrook was the kind of woman who didn't change much on the outside, but changed enormously underneath. She had the same dark hair, the same careful posture, the same habit of tucking a loose strand behind her ear when she was thinking. But there was something settled about her now that hadn't been there before, a composure that hadn't quite been there at 24. He wasn't sure if it was peace or if it was resignation, and he wasn't sure which of those would be harder to face. Then she turned and saw him. The laugh stopped. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way a candle goes out when a door opens. She looked at him for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she nodded. Once, at the way you nod at someone you once knew well and have since rearranged yourself around. "Nathaniel," she said. "Selena," he said. That was all. The older woman beside her glanced between them with the alert curiosity of someone who could sense a history without knowing the details. Selena said something polite to the woman, and then she walked past Nathaniel without stopping. He stood on the boardwalk and watched her go. He hadn't expected warmth, but the nod had been worse somehow, precise and controlled, the kind of greeting you practice. He spent that first day reacquainting himself with the town, which mostly meant sitting at the counter of the diner and drinking coffee until people stopped pretending not to look at him. Word traveled fast in small places. By noon, most of Dry Creek knew he was back. By mid-afternoon, his brother Edmund knew. Edmund Harrington was 2 years younger than Nathaniel and had always occupied space differently, louder, quicker to smile, easier to like at first meeting. He had done well for himself since Nathaniel left, ran a small freighting operation out of the edge of town, had a wife and a young son. He looked prosperous and comfortable in the way that some men do when the competition quietly removes itself. He found Nathaniel at the boarding house just before supper. Didn't think you'd come back," Edmund said from the doorway. "Didn't think I would either," Nathaniel said. Edmund leaned against the doorframe. There was something careful in his expression, the kind of careful that looks like ease but isn't. "You here for the Westbrook girl?" Nathaniel looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because I know you," Edmund said, "and because there's nothing else here for you." It was said plainly, almost gently, and Nathaniel let it sit without answering. Yet he had not yet decided how much he wanted to say to his brother. There were things he needed to understand first, things that had been bothering him more and more on the long ride here. He had written one letter. He had handed it to Edmund personally, and Selena had never replied. Not a word, not a line, not even a message passed through someone else. He had assumed her silence was an answer. But now, sitting across from his brother and watching that careful expression, the different possibility was beginning to take shape. He didn't sleep well. He lay in the narrow boarding house bed and looked at the ceiling and turned the question over the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath it. Edmund had been the one to post the letter. Edmund had always liked Selena. Nathaniel had known that, had noticed it, and set it aside because Edmund was his brother, and some things you simply trusted. You handed your brother a letter, and you trusted it would be sent. But what if it hadn't been? It was not a comfortable thought. It opened up 3 years of quiet grief and reframed it into something with edges. He wasn't ready to accuse anyone. He had no proof. He had only a silence that had never quite made sense, and a brother with a careful expression, and a woman who had stopped laughing the moment she saw his face. He reached into his coat and took out the letter. Not his letter. He had never gotten that back. This was a different one. A letter he had found 2 months ago, tucked inside an old book Edmund had lent him years before, which had followed Nathaniel from town to town in a crate of his things. A letter in Edmund's handwriting, unfinished, unsent, a draft of something that Edmund had started writing and stopped. Nathaniel had only read the first few lines before folding it back up. He hadn't let himself read the rest. Not yet. Because once he read it, he would know it, and knowing would change everything. What he said to his brother, what he said to Selena, and whether any of it still mattered with a wedding already set for spring. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in his coat pocket. Outside, Dry Creek was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something in the dark. The wind moved through the gap under the window with a low, persistent sound, like something asking to be let in. Nathaniel closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. Morning came gray and slow, the way it does in early spring when the land isn't sure yet whether winter has finished with it. Nathaniel was up before the sun, sitting on the edge of his bed with his boots already on, the letter still in his coat pocket where he had left it the night before. He had made a decision somewhere between midnight and dawn. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet settling. The way a man decides to stop avoiding a thing he has been walking around for too long. He was going to read the rest of Edmund's unfinished letter today. Whatever it said, he needed to know it. 3 years was long enough to carry a question that might have an answer. He went downstairs, ate the breakfast Mrs. Dobbs set out without much conversation, and walked out into the cool morning air. The town was just beginning to stir. A man was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. The 2 horses stood tied outside the diner. The smell of wood smoke drifted from somewhere up the hill. He found a bench at the far end of the main street, away from the foot traffic, where an old oak tree had grown close enough to the fence line to provide some shade even in the morning. He sat down, reached into his coat, and took out the folded letter. He opened it slowly, the way you open something you cannot unopen. Edmund's handwriting was loose and slanted, the kind of handwriting that moves fast because the hand is trying to keep up with something urgent. The letter was dated 3 years ago, within weeks of the time Nathaniel had left Dry Creek. The first lines Nathaniel had already read. They were addressed to no one in particular, which told him it was a draft. Edmund was working something out on paper before committing to it. The rest of it read like a confession that had lost its nerve halfway through. Edmund wrote about Selena, about how he had watched her for years, while Nathaniel took her for granted, about how he had convinced himself that Nathaniel wasn't right for her, too restless, too proud, too likely to leave her waiting, about how he had told himself, when Nathaniel handed him that letter to post, that he was doing everyone a favor. He had not posted it. He had kept it. And then, when Nathaniel left without waiting for a reply that was never going to come, Edmund had let the silence do its work. But he had waited. He had been patient. And then, carefully and gradually, he had made himself available to Selena as a steady presence, a familiar face, a man who was simply there when another man had seemingly chosen to disappear. But Selena had not turned to Edmund. She had kept to herself for a long time, and when she finally moved on, it had been toward Gerald Cobb, a quiet, unremarkable man who had nothing to do with the Harrington family at all. Edmund's patience had earned him nothing. The letter ended mid-sentence, as though he had stopped and put the pen down and never picked it up again. Nathaniel sat with the paper in his hands for a long time. The anger came, but not the way he expected. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of anger that sits low in the chest, heavy and still, the kind that doesn't have anywhere useful to go. His brother had taken something from him. Not violently, not with any cruelty that showed on the surface, just quietly, yet with a careful hand and a patient smile, the way small thefts happen when no one is watching. 3 years. He had spent 3 years believing Selena had chosen silence over him. He had rearranged his entire life around that belief, had taken it as a verdict on who he was, what he was worth to her, and all of it had been built on a letter that never arrived. He folded Edmund's draft carefully and put it back in his pocket. He didn't crumple it, didn't tear it. He was going to need it. Yet the question now was what to do with what he knew. He saw Edmund at midday, outside the freighting office on the edge of town. Edmund was talking to one of his workers when he noticed Nathaniel approaching. Something shifted in his expression, slight, quick, gone, before most people would have caught it. But Nathaniel had grown up watching his brother's face, and he caught it clearly. "Got a minute?" Nathaniel said. Edmund said something to the worker, who moved off. But they stood together in the narrow strip of shade along the side of the building. Edmund had his thumbs hooked in his belt, a posture that looked relaxed but wasn't. "Found something in one of your old books," Nathaniel said. He didn't take out the letter yet. He just watched his brother's face. Edmund said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, "Well, what kind of something? The kind you write when you're trying to talk yourself into believing you did the right thing." The silence between them stretched. A wagon rolled past on the street. Edmund looked down at his boots, then back up. His jaw was tight. "Nathaniel, I'm not here to fight you," Nathaniel said. And he meant it. Not because he wasn't angry, but because anger wasn't going to give him back 3 years. I just needed you to know that I know." Edmund looked at him with something complicated moving behind his eyes. It wasn't quite guilt, and it wasn't quite defiance. It was something in between, the expression of a man who had known for a long time that a particular day was coming and had never figured out what he would say when it arrived. "She didn't choose me anyway," Edmund said finally. It came out quieter than he probably intended, and it landed between them like something that was meant to be an explanation but wasn't quite. "That's not the point," Nathaniel said. Edmund nodded slowly. He knew it wasn't. Nathaniel left him standing there and walked back toward the center of town. He had said what he came to say. The rest of it, whatever came after, was still ahead of him. The harder question was Selena. He turned it over carefully as he walked. She was engaged. The wedding was in spring. But whatever had existed between them 3 years ago had been left unfinished through no fault of her own. But time had moved regardless. She had built a life around his absence, the way people do. Gerald Cobb was not a bad man, by any account he had heard. He was steady and present, and had never disappeared on anyone. Nathaniel had no right to walk into her life and overturn it simply because he now understood why things had gone the way they had. That wasn't how it worked. And yet, the letter he had written 3 years ago was still out there somewhere. Either Edmund had destroyed it, or it was sitting in a drawer in his house, forgotten or kept. He didn't know which, and Selena had never read a single word of it. She had made her peace with a silence she believed was his choice, when it had never been his choice at all. She deserved to know that much, not so he could reclaim something, just because the truth belonged to her. After he found his opportunity the following afternoon. Selena came into the diner while he was finishing a late lunch. She was alone this time, which was either chance or something else. He didn't let himself decide which. She saw him immediately, and for a moment he thought she might turn and leave. Instead, she walked to the counter and ordered a cup of coffee, and sat 2 seats down from him, with the particular posture of a woman who has decided to be civil. They sat in silence for a moment. "Here 3 days, Selena said finally. "Here 3 days, Selena said finally, looking at her coffee cup. "People are talking." "People talked when I left too," he said. She looked at him then, directly, with the kind of look that doesn't have any performance in it. "Why did you come back, Nathaniel?" He had thought about how to answer this. He had turned it over many times, but sitting beside her now, with the weight of what he knew pressing against his ribs, the careful answer he had prepared felt dishonest. "Because I found out something I should have known 3 years ago," he said. She watched him, waiting. "I wrote you a letter," he said. "Before I left, I gave it to Edmund to post." Something moved across her face, slow and careful, like ice shifting on a river in early spring, barely visible, but there. "I never received a letter," she said quietly. I know that now," he said. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had weight and texture. Selena set her coffee cup down with a steadiness that looked practiced, and she looked straight ahead at the wall behind the counter for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was even and composed, but it cost her something to make it that way. What did the letter say? Nathaniel looked at her. Outside, the wind moved through the street, and a loose board somewhere rattled once and went quiet. "Everything I should have said before I ever thought about leaving," he said. Selena didn't say anything for a long time after that. She sat with both hands wrapped around her coffee cup, looking at the wall in front of her with an expression that was difficult to read. Not blank exactly, but carefully composed, up the way a person looks when something unexpected has arrived, and they need a moment before they decide how to receive it. Nathaniel didn't push. He had said what he came to say, and he understood that the rest of it belonged to her. She was the one who had spent 3 years building something around a silence she believed was his. He had no right to rush her response. Finally, she said, "Why are you telling me this now?" It was a fair question, a reasonable one. That's yours. I'm not here to ask you to do with it. That's yours. I'm not here to ask you for anything." She looked at him then, just briefly, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there, she kept to herself. She finished her coffee, set a coin on the counter, and stood. She straightened her coat with quiet, unhurried movements. Then she said, "That followed had a particular quality to them, slow on the surface, tightly wound underneath." Nathaniel stayed in Dry Creek. He didn't announce his intentions to anyone. He took small work where he could find it, helped a rancher 2 miles out repair a section of fence, split wood for Mrs. Dobbs in exchange for a reduced rate on his room. Ye was hers to carry however she chose, but was hers to carry however she chose. But Dry Creek was a small town, and small towns have their own way of arranging things. He saw her at the general store on a Thursday morning. They exchanged a few words about nothing important, the weather, the state of the road north. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but when she turned to leave, she paused. Did Edmund ever give you back your letter?" she asked. "No," he said. She nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. Then she left. He went to Edmund that evening. His brother answered the door with the wary expression of a man who had been waiting for a second conversation and hadn't decided yet whether he was ready for it. Nathaniel didn't step inside. He stood on the porch and spoke plainly. "Do you still have it?" he asked. Edmund held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. He disappeared inside for a few minutes. When he came back, he was holding a folded envelope, worn at the edges and slightly yellowed with time. He held it out without a word. Nathaniel took it. He looked at it for a moment, his own handwriting on the front, Selena's name, the address, all of it exactly as he had left it 3 years ago, sealed and undelivered. He didn't say anything to Edmund. There wasn't much left to say. He stepped off the porch and walked back through the quiet evening streets of Dry Creek with the letter in his hand. He left it at the boarding house with Mrs. Dobbs the following morning before he went to work, with a simple instruction. If Selena Westbrook came by, she was to have it. No message attached, no explanation. Just the letter itself, which already contained everything he had ever meant to say. He spent the day at the ranch outside town, while working the fence line under a pale sky that couldn't quite decide whether to offer sun or cloud. He worked steadily and didn't let himself think too much. There was a particular mercy in physical labor, the way it occupied just enough of the mind to keep the restless parts quiet. By the time he rode back into town that evening, the light was going gold and low across the rooftops. He stabled his horse, washed up at the pump behind the boarding house, and went inside. Miss Dobbs was sitting in her usual chair by the front window with her sewing. She looked up when he came in. "Young woman came by this afternoon," she said, in the tone of someone reporting a simple fact. "Did she take it?" he asked. She did, Mrs. Dobbs said. And then, after a pause that contained considerably more than it showed, she added, she sat on the front step for a while after she read it. Nathaniel nodded. He went upstairs to his room. He didn't see Selena for 2 days after that. On the 3rd day, she came to the boarding house just after supper. Mrs. Dobbs showed her to the small sitting room off the front hallway and came to get Nathaniel without commentary. He found Selena standing by the window, looking out at the street. She turned when he came in. She had the letter in her hand, folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. I read it, she said. I figured, he said. She looked down at the letter for a moment, then back up at him. What, you wrote this 3 years ago? The night before I left, he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but carried something underneath it, something she wasn't trying to hide so much as simply manage. I waited for you, Nathaniel, for a long time. When nothing came, I thought. She stopped. I thought it meant what silence usually means. I know, he said. I thought the same about yours. The room was very still. Outside, but someone was moving along the boardwalk, boots loud on the planks, and then gone. I'm engaged, she said. Not defensively, just clearly, the way a person states a fact they need to keep in view. I know that too, he said. She looked at him with the same directness she had always had, the quality he had always respected about her. She never made you guess what she was thinking when she had decided to show you. Then what do you want from me? Nothing, he said. And then, because that wasn't entirely honest, he said, I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that I didn't choose silence, that I wrote down everything I felt, and I trusted the wrong person with it, and I have spent 3 years paying for that. You deserved to know that the silence wasn't mine. Selena looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair by the window, slowly, as if some of the steadiness had gone out of her legs. Gerald is a good man, she said quietly. I believe you, Nathaniel said. He's never given me a reason to doubt him. That matters, Nathaniel said, and he meant it. She looked down at the letter again. But I didn't love him the way. She stopped herself. Her jaw tightened slightly. She refolded the letter along its worn creases. I need more time, she said finally. You have it, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. What happened in the weeks that followed was not a dramatic unraveling of engagements or a triumphant reunion. Life in small towns rarely moved that cleanly. Selena did not immediately break things off with Gerald Cobb. She did not fall back into step with Nathaniel as though 3 years were easily undone. She was too careful for that, and too honest. But things shifted, the way ground shifts after a long rain, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. Gerald Cobb, who was a perceptive man despite his quiet manner, noticed a change in Selena before she said anything to him. He asked her directly one evening, the way steady men do when they have decided they would rather know than wonder. She told him the truth, because she was not the kind of woman who could do otherwise. It was a hard conversation, and Gerald did not take it easily. But he took it with dignity, which said something about who he was. Nathaniel heard about it secondhand, the way you hear most things in a small town. He was splitting wood behind the boarding house when Selena came to find him on a quiet Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after she had read the letter. She walked around the side of the building and stopped a few feet away and looked at him in the clear morning light. He set down the axe. She didn't make a speech. Selena had never been a woman for speeches. She simply said, I think we have some things to talk about. Properly this time. And if you're willing. I've been willing for 3 years, he said. Something in her face softened. Not dramatically, not with tears. Just a small, quiet release, the kind that comes when a door opens that has been shut for too long. "Then let's start there," she said. As for Edmund, that was a longer road. Brotherhood is not a thing that breaks cleanly, even when trust has been damaged. There were months of distance, of conversations that went short and careful. Edmund never offered a full explanation for what he had done, perhaps because there wasn't one that would hold up to honest examination. But one evening in late autumn, he came to find Nathaniel at the small house Nathaniel had begun renting on the edge of town, and he sat across from him at the table and said simply, "I'm sorry. I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I did it anyway. That's all I can tell you." It wasn't enough, but it was true. And sometimes, truth is the only place two people can start from. Nathaniel looked at his brother across the table for a long moment, thinking about 3 years on other men's land, carrying a verdict that had never been delivered. Then he said, "Don't do anything like that again." Edmund nodded. They didn't speak again that night. But Edmund came back the following week, and the week after that. And slowly, the way broken things sometimes do when both sides are willing to be patient, something began to repair itself. The letter Selena kept. Not on display, not in a place of importance, but in the drawer of the small table beside her bed, where she kept the things that mattered quietly. Nathaniel never asked for it back. It had always been hers. He had just needed it to reach her. 3 years late, worn at the edges, still sealed with the same care he had pressed into it on the night he wrote it. Some things arrive late, and still arrive right on time. But if you enjoy slow-burn Western stories, there are more waiting for you. Just look through the collection and settle in.